The last light of day streaked across the dusty horizon as Bethany Hughes clutched her meager belongings, watching the stagecoach that had abandoned her disappear into the distance. Tulsa, Oklahoma Territory, 1885, her new beginning, or perhaps just another disappointing chapter in a life that had seen too many false starts. The town wasn't much to look at, a single dirt road lined with weathered wooden structures, the tallest being the two-story saloon that cast long shadows over the smaller establishments. This wasn't the prosperous opportunity she'd been promised in that letter from the school board. "Madam, you planning on standing there till nightfall?" Bethany turned to find a grizzled old man with a gray beard watching her curiously from the porch of what appeared to be a general store. "I was told there would be someone to meet me," she replied, trying to keep the tremble from her voice. "I'm the new schoolteacher." The old man's eyebrows shot up. "New teacher? Ain't heard nothing about that. School's been closed since Miss Winters passed last winter." Bethany felt her stomach drop. "But I received a letter from the school board in Tulsa. They offered me a position." The old man shook his head. "School board disbanded months ago. Nearest proper schools in Broken Arrow now." Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks, but Bethany forced them back. 22 years old and already at another dead end. First the failed engagement in Boston, then the disastrous attempt at finding work in St. Louis, and now this stranded in a tiny Oklahoma town with no job and barely enough money for a night's lodging. "Is there somewhere I might stay?" "Just until I can arrange passage back east." The old man scratched his beard. "Widow Jenkins sometimes takes in boarders, but she's out visiting her sister in Oklahoma City." He looked thoughtful. "Though there is the Keller place. Old Adam Keller's got that big ranch house outside town. His boy helps him run it. Might be they could use some help around the place, at least until you figure your situation." "A ranch?" Bethany asked dubiously. What did she know about ranch work? Her hands were soft from years of teaching children their letters and numbers, not from hard labor. "About 3 miles east of town," the man continued. "Can't miss it. Big white house sits on a hill. Adam's a good man. Widowed 'bout 5 years now, raises his boy alone. They've had a rotating cast of housekeepers, but none seem to stick." With few options before her, Bethany thanked the man and began walking east. The sun was dropping faster now, painting the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. Her city boots were already pinching her feet, and the weight of her carpetbag grew heavier with each step. A mile outside of town, she was startled by the sound of hoofbeats. A young man atop a chestnut horse came riding toward her, slowing as he approached. He couldn't have been more than 20, with sandy hair and a face tanned from long days under the sun. "You lost, madam?" he called out, tipping his hat. Bethany straightened her posture. "I'm headed for the Keller Ranch. Would you happen to know if I'm on the right path?" The young man's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're looking at a Keller. Andrew Keller, but most folks call me Drew." He dismounted in one fluid motion. "What business do you have at our ranch, Mississippi?" "Hughes. Bethany Hughes." She hesitated, unsure how to explain her situation without sounding desperate. "I arrived in town today expecting to begin a teaching position, only to discover the school has closed. A gentleman in town suggested your father might have need of help around your home." Drew studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes assessing but not unkind. "Pa doesn't usually take to strangers, but we lost our housekeeper last month." Mrs. Watkins decided city life in Tulsa proper suited her better. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Though I suspect it was more the attention of the new shopkeeper that drew her away." He looked at her carpetbag, then back at the darkening sky. "It'll be nightfall soon. No sense in you walking all that way." He offered his hand. "I can take you the rest of the way, if you don't mind riding double." Bethany hesitated. Back east, riding with a strange man would be scandalous, But this was the frontier, and darkness was approaching rapidly. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her onto the horse behind him. "Hold tight," he instructed, and she gingerly placed her hands at his waist as the horse began moving at a gentle trot. The Keller ranch emerged from the dusk like a painting, a large white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Lights glowed from within, warm and inviting against the deepening blue of the evening sky. As they approached, the front door opened, and a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair stepped onto the porch. He wore practical clothes, dusty trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of hard work. "Drew? Who's this?" His voice was deep and carried an edge of suspicion. Drew helped Bethany dismount before answering. "Pa, this is Miss Hughes. She came to town expecting to teach at the school, but seems someone gave her bad information. School's been closed since winter." Adam Keller's stern expression didn't waver as he took in Bethany's city clothes and delicate features. "And you brought her here because Mr. Jenkins at the store suggested your family might be in need of household help," Bethany interjected, determined not to be discussed as if she weren't present. "I find myself stranded without employment, but I'm willing to work until I can afford passage back east." Adam's gaze traveled from her face to her hands, soft, uncalloused, clearly unused to ranch work. "Being a housekeeper on a cattle ranch isn't like keeping a city home, Miss Hughes." "I'm a quick learner, Mr. Keller," she replied, squaring her shoulders. "And I don't shy away from hard work." A skeptical expression crossed Adam's face, but before he could respond, Drew spoke up. "Pa, we can't send her back to town tonight. There's nowhere for her to stay." Adam sighed, then gestured toward the door. "One night. We'll talk about the rest in the morning." The interior of the Keller home surprised Bethany. Despite the rough exterior, the inside was well kept, with solid furniture and a few touches that spoke of a woman's hand from years past. Curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the back of a sofa, a painting of wildflowers on one wall. "Hungry?" Drew asked as she set down her carpetbag. "I couldn't impose," she began, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Drew grinned. "I'll take that as a yes. Pa made stew. He's not much for fancy cooking, but it'll fill you up." Adam was already at the stove, ladling stew into bowls. "Drew, show Miss Hughes where she can wash up." Drew led her to a small washroom off the kitchen where a basin and pitcher waited. The water was cool against her dusty face and hands. She smoothed her travel-rumpled dress as best she could and rejoined the men at the table. The stew was simple but hearty, filled with chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots. They ate in silence for several minutes before Adam spoke. "What brings a woman like you out west alone, Miss Hughes?" Bethany carefully set down her spoon. "Necessity, Mr. Keller. My father passed last year, leaving significant debts. I've been supporting myself by teaching, moving where positions are available." She didn't mention the broken engagement. The humiliation of being left for a wealthier bride still stung too sharply. "And your mother?" "Lost to influenza when I was 16. Something in Adam's expression softened slightly. "Sorry to hear that." Drew looked between them before changing the subject. "Miss Hughes, what subjects did you teach?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and some natural sciences," she replied, grateful for the shift. "I also taught music when possible, though instruments were often lacking in smaller schools." Drew's eyes brightened. "Do you play the piano?" "We've got one in the parlor. Ma used to play, but it's been silent for years." "Drew," Adam's voice held a warning note. "I do play," Bethany said softly, conscious of the tension that had entered the room at the mention of Drew's mother. "Perhaps another time." After the meal, Adam excused himself to finish some work in his study. leaving Drew to show Bethany to her room. He led her upstairs to a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. "It's not much," Drew apologized, "but the sheets are clean. It's perfectly adequate. Thank you for your kindness." Drew lingered in the doorway. "Pa seems gruff, but he's fair. If you decide to stay on, he'll treat you right." "I'm not certain your father wants me to stay." Drew smiled. "Pa's been saying we don't need help around here since Ma died. Doesn't like strangers in his space. But this place is too big for just the two of us to keep up with, especially during calving season." Bethany noticed a small bookshelf in the corner. "Are those your books?" Drew followed her gaze and nodded. "Some of Ma's, some mine. Pa doesn't read much besides the newspaper and cattle journals." He pulled out a leather-bound volume. "This one's my favorite. Adventure stories. Pa used to read them to me when I was little before." He trailed off. "Before your mother passed," Bethany finished gently. Drew nodded, putting the book back. Been a while since anyone read those stories aloud. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "You being a teacher and all, I bet you read real nice." Bethany smiled. "I've been told I have a talent for bringing stories to life. Maybe someday." Drew trailed off again, then cleared his throat. "Well, good night, Miss Hughes. Breakfast is at dawn." After he left, Bethany unpacked her few possessions and prepared for bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the low murmur of voices downstairs, Adam and Drew discussing her presence. No doubt. She tried not to dwell on what tomorrow might bring, focusing instead on making it through one day at a time, as she had been doing since her father's death. She was awoken before sunrise by a rooster's persistent crowing. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't place where she was. The room was unfamiliar, the bed firmer than what she was accustomed to. Then yesterday's events came flooding back: the stagecoach, the abandoned school position, the Keller ranch. Bethany dressed quickly in her plainest dress, attempting to make herself look capable of ranch work. She smoothed her dark hair into a simple bun and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. Adam was already at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up as she entered, surprise briefly crossing his features. "You're up early. You mentioned breakfast at dawn," she replied, nodding toward the window where the sky was just beginning to lighten. He grunted in acknowledgement. "Coffee's ready. Cups in that cabinet." Bethany poured herself a cup, then asked, "May I help with anything?" "Eggs in the bowl there. 6 should do it." She found another skillet and set about scrambling eggs, aware of Adam watching her from the corner of his eye. The kitchen fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the sizzle of bacon and the scrape of her spoon against the pan. Drew arrived just as they were finishing, his hair damp from washing, face freshly shaved. "Morning, Miss Hughes. Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." They sat down to eat, the silence less strained with Drew acting as a buffer between them. Halfway through the meal, Adam set down his fork and looked directly at Bethany. "If you're serious about working here, I can offer room and board plus $5 a week. Duties would include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and helping with the garden. Sundays off, unless it's harvest time or we're in the middle of calving." Bethany considered the offer. It wasn't much, but it would allow her to save enough for a ticket back east within a few months. "What about the school? Is there any chance it might reopen?" Adam shook his head. "Not enough children in the area anymore. Most families moved closer to Broken Arrow where there's a proper school." "I see." Bethany took a sip of coffee. "May I ask about your previous housekeeper? Why did so many leave?" Drew snorted, earning a glare from his father. "Ranch life isn't for everyone," Adam said simply. "It's isolated, the work is hard, and the hours are long. And Pa can be about as friendly as a rattlesnake with a toothache, Drew added with a grin. Adam's lips twitched slightly, almost a smile. My son exaggerates. I simply prefer things done a certain way. You mean your way? Drew muttered, not unkindly. Bethany found herself warming to their dynamic. Despite Adam's gruffness, there was clearly deep affection between father and son. I accept your terms, Mr. Keller, she said. On a trial basis. 2 weeks. If either of us is dissatisfied after that time, we part ways with no ill feelings. Adam studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. He stood, collecting his dishes. Drew will show you around today, get you acquainted with the house and what needs doing. I've got to check the north pasture fence line. After he left, Drew helped Bethany clear the table. Don't mind Pa. He's been that way since Ma died. Used to laugh more. How old were you when you lost your mother? 15. Drew scrubbed a hand through his sandy hair. Typhoid fever took her. Quick, but not quick enough, if you know what I mean. Bethany nodded, understanding all too well the pain of watching a parent suffer. And it's been just you and your father since then? Pretty much. Had an aunt stay with us for a while, but she and Pa butted heads something fierce. Then a series of housekeepers, none lasting more than a few months. He gave her a sidelong glance. Hope you've got more staying power. 2 weeks, she reminded him. That's all I've promised for now. Drew spent the morning showing Bethany around the ranch house, a sprawling structure with 6 bedrooms, a formal dining room they rarely used, a parlor with the promised piano, and a library filled with books that looked untouched. The kitchen was well-equipped but showed signs of bachelor living, with mismatched dishes and utensils crammed haphazardly into drawers. Pa's not one for organization, Drew explained as Bethany opened a cabinet to find a jumble of plates, bowls, and cups. Says as long as it's clean, who cares where it goes? And what do you think? She asked, already mentally rearranging the kitchen. Drew shrugged. Never gave it much thought. But I suppose it would be nice to know where things are without having to dig through 3 drawers. Outside, he showed her the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that had seen better days, and the wash house where laundry was done. At the barn, several ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully as Drew introduced her. Miss Hughes is our new housekeeper, he explained. She'll be staying with us for a while. By midday, Bethany was exhausted but determined not to show it. Her city shoes were wholly inadequate for ranch life, and her back ached from bending over the garden, pulling weeds and assessing what vegetables might be salvageable. Drew noticed her discomfort. We can head into town tomorrow, get you some proper boots and work clothes. Those fancy dresses won't last a week out here. Bethany looked down at her once fine dress, now dusty and stained with garden soil. I suppose you're right, though I hadn't budgeted for new clothes just yet. Pa will advance it against your wages. He's fair that way. That evening, Bethany prepared a simple meal of fried chicken, potatoes, and green beans from the garden. Adam returned just as she was setting the table, his face weathered from a day in the sun, clothes dusty from riding the range. Smells good, he said, washing his hands at the pump outside before entering. The meal passed in relative silence, though less awkward than breakfast. After they finished, Adam retreated to his study while Drew helped Bethany with the dishes. Pa always disappears after dinner, Drew explained. Says it's to do the books, but mostly he just sits there with a glass of whiskey, looking at Ma's picture. He must have loved her very much, Bethany observed. They were everything to each other, Drew confirmed, a hint of sadness in his voice. Sometimes I think Pa forgot I lost her too. Bethany's heart ached for the young man. 5 years was a long time to live with a grief-stricken father in this isolated place. What do you usually do in the evenings? Drew shrugged. Read sometimes. Whittle. In winter, I try to keep up with my studies. Your studies? Ma was teaching me before she died. Pa wanted me to go to college back east like he did, but after Ma passed, he couldn't bear the thought of me leaving too. Drew's voice held no resentment, just simple acceptance. So I try to learn what I can from books. An idea formed in Bethany's mind. Perhaps I could help you. With your studies, in the evenings after work is done. Drew's face brightened. You wouldn't mind? Not at all. Teaching is my profession, after all. And it would give me something useful to do with my evenings as well. Later that night, as Bethany was preparing for bed, she heard a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Drew standing there, the leather-bound book of adventure stories in his hand. I was wondering, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, if maybe you might read a bit? Just one story. His cheeks colored slightly. I know it sounds childish, but I miss hearing these stories aloud. Bethany smiled, touched by his vulnerability. I'd be happy to. Shall we go downstairs so we don't disturb your father? Drew shook his head. Pa's already asleep. He turns in early, rises before dawn. He glanced toward the room at the end of the hall. We could sit on the landing? There's a window seat there. The window seat overlooked the front of the property, moonlight streaming in to provide just enough light to read by. Bethany settled beside Drew, opening the book to where a ribbon marked his place. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, she read, smiling. A controversial choice in some circles. Pa doesn't know, Drew admitted. He'd probably disapprove. Says Mark Twain has dangerous ideas. All the best writers do, Bethany replied with a small smile. She began to read, her voice soft in the quiet house, bringing the words to life with subtle changes in tone and pacing. Drew listened, captivated, occasionally glancing at her profile in the moonlight. When she finished the chapter, he sighed contentedly. You read even better than Ma did, he said, then immediately looked stricken. I shouldn't have said that. It's all right, Bethany assured him. I'm honored by the comparison. Drew hesitated, then asked, could we do this again tomorrow night? Maybe. Maybe read another chapter. Of course. Bethany closed the book, handing it back to him. It's a lovely way to end the day. As they stood to return to their rooms, Drew impulsively caught her hand. I'm glad you came here, Miss Hughes, even if it's just for 2 weeks. Bethany felt a strange flutter in her chest at his touch. So am I, Drew. Good night. The next morning at breakfast, Adam announced they would all go into town for supplies. Thought we might get you some proper work clothes, he said gruffly to Bethany. Those city dresses won't hold up to ranch work. Thank you, Mr. Keller. That's very thoughtful. The trip to town was Bethany's first opportunity to see Tulsa in daylight. It was larger than she'd initially thought, with several streets branching off from the main thoroughfare. The general store was well stocked, carrying everything from food staples to clothing to farm equipment. While Adam spoke with the shopkeeper about a shipment of barbed wire, Drew helped Bethany select sturdy boots, several work dresses, and a pair of practical trousers that made her blush to even consider wearing. Trust me, Drew assured her. When you're gathering eggs or working in the garden, you'll be glad for them. As they were paying for their purchases, the bell over the door jingled, and a well-dressed woman entered, followed by a girl of about 18 who was clearly her daughter, given their similar features. Adam Keller, the woman called, approaching them with a predatory smile. What a pleasant surprise to see you in town. Adam's posture stiffened. Mrs. Blackburn. Miss Blackburn. He nodded to each in turn. Victoria, please, the woman corrected, placing a gloved hand on his arm. After all these years, surely we can dispense with formalities. Bethany noticed Drew's expression darken as he subtly moved closer to her side. "And who might this be?" Victoria asked, her gaze sliding to Bethany with thinly veiled assessment. "Miss Hughes is our new housekeeper," Adam replied, his tone neutral. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "Another one? My, they do seem to come and go, don't they?" Her gaze returned to Adam. "Perhaps what you need is a more permanent female presence in your home." "We manage just fine," Adam said curtly. "If you'll excuse us, we have more errands to run." Once outside, Bethany couldn't help but ask, "Who was that woman?" "Victoria Blackburn," Drew answered, his voice tight. "Widow of a banker. Been setting her cap for Pa since her mourning period ended 2 years ago. She seems determined." "That's one word for it," Drew muttered. "She's been trying to marry Pa since before Ma was cold in her grave." Adam, walking ahead of them, called over his shoulder, "That's enough, Drew. Mrs. Blackburn is a respectable woman." "Doesn't make her any less of a vulture?" Drew replied under his breath, just loud enough for Bethany to hear. They made several more stops: the feed store, the butcher, and finally the post office, where Adam collected mail that had accumulated over the past month. On the ride home, Drew drove the wagon while Adam rode alongside on horseback. Bethany sat beside Drew, conscious of his proximity and the way he occasionally glanced at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "Pa won't ever marry her, you know," he said suddenly, keeping his voice low. "Victoria, he still loves Ma too much." "Your father's personal life is none of my concern," Bethany replied diplomatically. Drew gave her a sidelong look. "But you are concerned, aren't you? About him? About us?" Bethany wasn't sure how to answer. In just 2 days, she'd found herself inexplicably drawn into the Kellers' lives, curious about their past and invested in their well-being. It was unprofessional and potentially unwise, considering her position and the temporary nature of her stay. "I'm concerned about doing my job well," she finally said. "The rest is not my place to say." Drew seemed about to respond when Adam rode up alongside the wagon. "Storm brewing to the west," he announced, pointing to dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Best pick up the pace." They arrived back at the ranch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. After unloading the supplies, Bethany set about preparing dinner while Adam and Drew secured the livestock and outbuildings against the coming storm. By evening, the rain was falling in sheets, drumming against the roof and windows. Thunder rolled across the prairie, and lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant flashes. After dinner, Adam retired to his study as usual, while Drew lingered in the kitchen, watching Bethany clean up. "Too wet to read by the window tonight," he said, disappointment evident in his voice. Bethany glanced toward the parlor, where the piano sat unused. "Perhaps we could try something different?" Drew followed her gaze and shook his head. "Pa doesn't like anyone playing Ma's piano." "I understand." Bethany finished drying the last plate. "We could sit in the parlor anyway. There's more light there than on the landing." They settled on the sofa, the book open between them. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the parlor, a cocoon of warmth surrounded them as Bethany read, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story. Neither noticed Adam standing in the doorway, watching them with an unreadable expression on his face. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Bethany settled into life at the ranch. She tackled the disorganized kitchen first, creating a logical system that even Adam had to admit improved efficiency. The garden began to flourish under her care, with neat rows of vegetables replacing the overgrown tangle she'd first encountered. Each night after dinner, she and Drew would sit together while she read from his book of adventures. Sometimes Adam would listen from his study, the door cracked open just enough to hear her voice. Occasionally, he would even join them, sitting quietly in an armchair across the room, his face softening as he listened. On Sunday, her day off, Bethany asked if she might attend church in town. Adam offered to drive her in the wagon, explaining that he and Drew alternated Sundays at church, one always staying behind to watch the ranch. "I'm sure Drew would enjoy escorting you today," Adam said, his eyes twinkling with a rare glimpse of humor. "He seems to find your company agreeable." Bethany felt her cheeks warm. She'd become increasingly aware of Drew's attention over the past week, his eagerness to help her with chores, the way his eyes followed her movements, the lingering touches when they passed items between them. "Mr. Keller, I hope you don't think. That is, I wouldn't want you to believe I have any improper intentions toward your son." Adam's expression grew serious. "Miss Hughes, my son is nearly 21, a grown man by any measure. And while you're employed in this house, you're also a guest and deserving of respect." He paused. "Drew hasn't shown interest in anyone since his mother died, retreated into his books and his work. It's good to see him engaging with the world again." Bethany wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected openness from the usually taciturn man. "Besides," Adam continued, "we both know you'll be leaving once you've saved enough for your ticket east. No harm in friendly conversation in the meantime." His words gave her an unexpected pang. The thought of leaving, which had been her goal since arriving, now filled her with a strange reluctance. At church, Bethany sat beside Drew in the simple wooden pew, acutely aware of the curious glances from the townsfolk. Victoria Blackburn sat across the aisle, her eyes narrowing when she spotted them together. After the service, as they stood outside speaking with the minister, Victoria approached, her daughter in tow. "Drew," she said warmly, "how lovely to see you. And Miss Hughes as well." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I was just telling Margaret what a shame it is that a handsome young man like yourself is so isolated on that ranch. We're having a small gathering next Saturday evening. Nothing fancy, just a few friends for music and conversation. You must join us." Before Drew could respond, Victoria turned to Bethany. "And of course, you're welcome as well, Miss Hughes. I'm sure you'd enjoy meeting more people in town. It must be dreadfully boring out there with just the Keller men for company." Bethany forced a polite smile. "On the contrary, I find ranch life quite engaging. There's always something that needs attention." "Yes, I suppose housekeeping does keep one busy." Victoria's tone made it clear she considered the occupation beneath notice. "But surely you'd welcome an evening of civilized company?" Drew stepped slightly closer to Bethany. "We'll have to check with Pa. Saturdays are busy days at the ranch." "Of course," Victoria agreed smoothly. "Do let us know. Margaret would be especially pleased if you could attend." The shy young woman blushed at being mentioned, her eyes fixed firmly on the ground. As they drove home, Bethany asked, "Will you go?" "To the Blackburns' gathering." Drew's hands tightened on the reins. "Not likely. Victoria's been trying to match me with Margaret for months. She figures if Pa won't marry her, the next best thing is to make her daughter my wife and bind our families that way. Margaret seems sweet. She's nice enough, quiet, always does what her mother tells her." Drew glanced at Bethany. "Not my type." "And what is your type, Drew Keller?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes met hers, intense and searching. "Someone who speaks her mind, who isn't afraid of hard work or getting her hands dirty. Someone who can read a story and make you feel like you're living it." Bethany's heart quickened at his words, at the clear implication behind them. "Drew, I know," he interrupted. "You're leaving. Pa reminded me this morning." His jaw tightened. 2 more weeks, right? That was our agreement." "Yes," she replied softly, though the thought brought her no joy. "That was our agreement." That evening, their reading session held a different tension. Drew sat further away than usual, his responses to the story more subdued. When they finished the chapter, He closed the book with a finality that made Bethany's chest tighten. "Drew," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing she couldn't bear this new distance between them. "It's late," he said, standing abruptly. "Early start tomorrow. Good night, Miss Hughes." She watched him go, a hollow feeling spreading through her. In the study doorway, Adam stood observing them, his expression thoughtful. The following days brought a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for fall roundup. Extra hands arrived to help, sleeping in the bunkhouse and taking meals in the kitchen. Bethany found herself cooking for 12 instead of 3, rising before dawn to prepare hearty breakfasts and staying up late to bake bread and pies for the hungry men. Drew was gone from dawn till dusk, returning exhausted and filthy, often too tired for their evening reading sessions. Bethany missed those quiet moments more than she cared to admit. On the 4th night of roundup, as she was finishing the dinner dishes, Adam appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You've been a godsend this week," he said, the compliment surprising her. "The men are saying it's the best food they've had on any roundup." "Thank you, Mr. Keller. I'm glad I could help." Adam leaned against the doorframe, studying her. 2 weeks are nearly up. Bethany's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Yes, I suppose they are." "Found what you were looking for yet? A teaching position?" "I haven't had time to inquire," she admitted. With the roundup preparations and daily chores, she'd barely thought about leaving. Adam stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Well, no rush, I suppose. Position's yours as long as you want it." He started to turn away, then paused. "Drew's at the barn. Says one of the Mares is favoring her front leg. Might appreciate some company." Bethany dried her hands, puzzled by Adam's unusual openness. "Are you giving me permission to spend time with your son, Mr. Keller?" A rare smile crossed Adam's face. "Miss Hughes, I've been watching my boy drag himself in at night, filthy and exhausted, but still looking around for you before he even takes off his boots. Whatever's between you two, it ain't just friendship." He shrugged. "Life's too short to waste time dancing around feelings. My Catherine taught me that." Stunned by his candor, Bethany could only nod as he walked away. The night air was cool as she made her way to the barn, lantern in hand. She found Drew in one of the stalls, gently examining a chestnut mare's front hoof. "Your father said you could use some company," she said softly. Drew looked up, surprise and pleasure crossing his face before he schooled his expression. "Did he now? Seems Pa's getting mighty sociable in his old age." Bethany set the lantern on a hook and entered the stall. "Is she all right?" "Just a stone bruise. She'll be fine with a day's rest." Drew released the mare's leg and straightened. In the lantern light, she could see how tired he looked, shadows under his eyes, a weariness in his posture that hadn't been there before roundup began. "You work too hard," she said, stepping closer. Drew gave a short laugh. "Says the woman who's been up before dawn every day this week cooking for a dozen hungry cowboys. We've barely seen each other." "Been busy," he replied, though his eyes never left her face. "Too busy for stories?" A flash of the old Drew appeared in his smile. "Never too busy for that. Just too tired to keep my eyes open past 8 o'clock. Bethany reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the book she'd tucked there on impulse. "I thought perhaps just one chapter, for old time's sake." Drew's expression softened. "You brought the book?" "I did." She opened it to where they had left off. "Shall I read here, or would you prefer to go inside?" "Here's good," Drew said, spreading a clean blanket over a pile of hay. "If you don't mind the accommodations." They sat side by side, the lantern casting warm light over the pages as Bethany began to read. Drew leaned against the stall divider, eyes closed, a small smile playing at his lips as he listened. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book softly. Drew. I've been thinking about our agreement. His eyes opened, suddenly alert. The 2 weeks. She nodded. They're almost up. Drew sat up straighter, tension visible in every line of his body. And? Have you decided? Bethany took a deep breath. I think I'd like to stay. A bit longer, at least. The relief on Drew's face was palpable. How much longer? I'm not sure. Until the right teaching position comes along, perhaps. Drew studied her face in the lantern light. Is that the only reason? The job? Bethany met his gaze steadily. No, there are other reasons. Such as, I've grown fond of this place, of the work, she hesitated. Drew prompted, shifting closer. Of the people here, she finished softly. Drew reached out, his fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Any people in particular? Bethany's heart raced at his touch. Perhaps 1 or 2. His hand lingered near her face, then slowly withdrew. Bethany, he said, the first time he'd used her given name. I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated or because you haven't found something better yet. I want. He broke off, struggling to find the words. What do you want, Drew? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to stay because you want to be here. With us. With me. His eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 2 weeks. But I've never felt this way about anyone before. Bethany's breath caught in her throat. Drew. A shout from outside interrupted them. Drew, you in there? Boss is looking for you. Drew closed his eyes briefly, frustration clear on his face. I have to go. We're still short 2 steers from the north pasture. He stood, offering her his hand. Will you wait up? Talk to me when I get back. Bethany took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. I'll wait. But Drew didn't return until well after midnight, and Bethany, despite her best intentions, had fallen asleep in the parlor, the book of adventures open on her lap. Adam found her there when he came down for a glass of water, gently covering her with a blanket rather than waking her. Morning brought chaos as the ranch prepared for the cattle drive to the railhead in Broken Arrow. Bethany rose early to prepare food for the men to take with them: biscuits, jerky, beans, and coffee enough to last several days. Drew found her in the kitchen, packing the provisions into saddlebags. He looked as if he hadn't slept, his eyes bloodshot, his movements sluggish with exhaustion. I'm sorry about last night, he said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. By the time we found those steers, it was past midnight. It's all right. I understand. Drew glanced around to ensure they were alone, then stepped closer. About what I said in the barn. You don't need to explain, Bethany interrupted. You were tired. Emotions were running high. No, Drew said firmly. I meant every word. And I would have said more if we hadn't been interrupted. Before Bethany could respond, Adam entered the kitchen, followed by several ranch hands eager for breakfast. The moment was lost in the flurry of activity that followed. Drew left with the other men an hour later, the cattle drive expected to take 3 days. As Bethany watched them ride away, Adam came to stand beside her on the porch. Quiet now, he observed. Just you and me for a few days. Yes, Bethany agreed, already missing Drew's presence. Will they be all right? The drive can be dangerous, can't it? Adam's expression softened at her concern. Drew's been doing this since he was 16. He knows what he's doing. He studied her face for a moment. You care for him. It wasn't a question, but Bethany answered anyway. I do. More than I expected to. Adam nodded, unsurprised. He feels the same. Been obvious from the start. Mr. Keller. Adam, he corrected. If you're staying, might as well use my given name. Am I staying then? She asked. Our 2-week agreement is up tomorrow. Way I see it, agreement's just words. Actions speak louder. He gestured toward the garden she'd revitalized, the tidy kitchen visible through the window. Your actions say you care about this place, about the people in it. He gave her a knowing look. One person in particular. Bethany flushed. I do care, but it's so soon, and I barely know. Sometimes soon is all you get. Adam interrupted, a shadow crossing his face. Catherine and I had 10 years. Not nearly enough, but I wouldn't trade a single day. He turned to face her directly. Life's uncertain, Miss Hughes, especially out here. If you find someone who lights up your world, you hold on tight. With that, he headed toward the barn, leaving Bethany to ponder his words. The days without Drew stretched longer than Bethany had anticipated. She kept busy with chores, deep cleaning areas of the house that had been neglected, working in the garden, and helping Adam with the horses. In the evenings, they sat in companionable silence, Adam with his newspaper, Bethany with her mending or a book. On the afternoon of the third day, Adam rode out to meet the returning cattle drive. Bethany spent the hours of his absence preparing a hearty welcome home meal: roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. As dusk approached, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Heart racing with anticipation, she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. The sight that greeted her froze the blood in her veins. Adam was riding ahead, his face grim. Behind him, 2 ranch hands led a horse bearing a still form draped over the saddle. Drew, she whispered, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. Adam dismounted quickly, coming to her side. He's alive, he assured her, grasping her arms to steady her. Thrown from his horse when a rattler spooked it. Hit his head pretty hard. Been unconscious most of the ride back. The ranch hands carefully lifted Drew from the horse, carrying him into the house and upstairs to his bedroom under Adam's direction. Bethany followed, her heart in her throat. Drew's face was pale beneath his tan, a nasty gash visible at his temple. Adam cleaned and bandaged the wound while Bethany hovered anxiously nearby. Doc Stevens is out at the Thompson place delivering a baby, Adam said. Sent one of the boys to fetch him as soon as he's done there. He looked up at Bethany. Not much more we can do now except wait and keep him comfortable. Bethany nodded, pulling a chair close to Drew's bedside. I'll sit with him. Adam squeezed her shoulder gratefully. Call if there's any change. I need to see to the men and horses. Through the night, Bethany maintained her vigil. She bathed Drew's face with cool water when fever set in, spoke softly to him when he grew restless, and held his hand when he seemed to be searching for something in his delirium. Near dawn, the doctor finally arrived, examining Drew thoroughly before offering his assessment. Concussion, for certain. Perhaps a small skull fracture, though it's hard to tell. The next 24 hours are critical. He looked sympathetically at Bethany's exhausted face. You should get some rest, Miss Hughes. There's nothing more you can do at the moment. I'd prefer to stay, she replied firmly. The doctor nodded, then turned to Adam. Keep him quiet when he wakes. No exertion for at least a week, preferably longer. Watch for confusion, severe headaches, or changes in his breathing. After the doctor left, Adam insisted Bethany at least take a break to eat something. She reluctantly agreed, leaving Drew's side for the first time in hours. In the kitchen, Adam handed her a cup of strong coffee. He's strong, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Gets that from his mother. He'll pull through. What if he doesn't? Bethany whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. Adam's hand trembled slightly as he set down his own cup. Then we face that together. But he will. Got too much to live for. Bethany returned to Drew's room, settling back into her chair with a book, the adventure stories they had been reading together. Though her eyes burned with fatigue, she began to read aloud, hoping that somewhere in his unconscious state, Drew could hear her voice and find his way back. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, casting warm light through the bedroom window. Bethany read until her voice grew hoarse, then simply held Drew's hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest. It was late afternoon when his eyelids finally fluttered open. Confusion clouded his gaze until it settled on Bethany's face. Bethany? His voice was weak, barely audible. Relief washed over her like a wave. I'm here, Drew. You're home. You had an accident. He winced, raising a hand to the bandage at his temple. My head feels like it's been kicked by a mule. That's not far from what happened. Your horse threw you when it was spooked by a rattlesnake. Drew's eyes widened suddenly. What day is it? Wednesday. You've been unconscious since yesterday. No, he said, agitation creeping into his voice. The agreement, the 2 weeks, are they up? Bethany couldn't help but smile at his concern. Yes, they're up, but I'm still here. Relief washed over his features. You're staying. I'm staying, she confirmed, squeezing his hand. Though I'm not sure I'm cut out for ranch life if this is what I have to look forward to, men getting themselves half killed and giving me gray hairs before I'm 30. A weak smile crossed Drew's face. Worth it though, right? Bethany felt tears threatening. Barely. You scared me half to death, Drew Keller. Sorry about that. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion pulling him back towards sleep. Don't leave, Kay? Stay. Read me a story. Bethany's heart swelled with emotion. I'll stay. I promise. Drew's eyes closed, his breathing evening out as he drifted back to sleep. Bethany reached for the book, opened to where they had left off, and began to read softly, her voice filling the quiet room with adventure and promise. In the doorway, Adam watched silently, a small smile playing at his lips. Drew's recovery was slow but steady. For the first few days, he drifted in and out of consciousness, often waking confused until his eyes found Bethany. She rarely left his side, sleeping in the chair beside his bed and taking her meals there. By the end of the week, he was able to stay awake for longer periods, though the doctor still insisted on complete rest. Bethany read to him for hours, their adventure book nearly finished. What happens when we run out of stories? Drew asked one afternoon as Bethany closed the book, marking their place. We find new ones, she replied simply. Your father mentioned a shelf of books in the library that were your mother's favorites. Drew's expression grew thoughtful. He did? Pa doesn't usually talk about Ma's things. He's been different since your accident. More open. Bethany hesitated, then added, he told me about how he and your mother met at a college dance back east. How he knew the moment he saw her that she was the one. He never told me that story, Drew said softly. Perhaps he was waiting for the right time. Bethany smoothed the blanket over Drew's legs. He loves you very much, you know. These past days have been hard on him. Been hard on you too, Drew observed, reaching for her hand. You look exhausted. Bethany smiled wryly. Such flattery, Mr. Keller. Truth, Miss Hughes. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Beautiful but exhausted. You need to rest. I will. When you're better. Drew's gaze held hers, intense despite his weakened state. You kept your promise. You stayed. I did. Will you make me another promise? Bethany raised an eyebrow. That depends on what you're asking. Drew's voice grew more serious. Promise you won't leave without telling me why. That you'll give me a chance to fix whatever makes you want to go. Bethany felt her throat tighten with emotion. I promise. The following week brought more improvement. Drew was allowed to sit up in bed, then to move to a chair by the window, and finally, under strict supervision, to walk slowly around his room. "I'm going stir-crazy in here," he complained one morning as Bethany brought him breakfast. "Can't I at least go downstairs?" Doctor's orders were clear. No stairs until next week. Drew's expression turned pleading. "Just to the porch? I miss fresh air." Bethany considered, then relented. "Let me speak with your father. Perhaps if we help you down." Adam agreed that some fresh air might do Drew good. Together, they supported him down the stairs and out to the porch swing, where he sat with a blanket over his legs despite the warm September day. "Heaven?" Drew sighed, closing his eyes and turning his face to the sun. "Thought I'd never feel this again." Bethany sat beside him, noting with pleasure the healthy color returning to his cheeks. "Dramatic as always, Mr. Keller." Drew opened one eye to look at her. "Nearly dying earns me the right to a little drama, don't you think?" "You weren't nearly dying," she corrected, though the memory of those first frightening hours still made her stomach clench. "You had a concussion. Felt like dying," Drew countered. He reached for her hand, his expression growing serious. "When I was unconscious, I could hear you sometimes. Your voice, reading to me. It gave me something to follow back." Bethany squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I've been thinking," Drew continued, "about what happens next. Next, when I'm fully recovered. When life goes back to normal." His eyes met hers. "What will your place be? Here at the ranch?" Bethany had been asking herself the same question. These past weeks had transformed her role from temporary housekeeper to what? She wasn't sure how to define it. "I suppose I'll continue as before," she said carefully. "Cooking, cleaning, helping with the garden. And in the evenings, will you still read with me?" "If you wish." Drew's gaze intensified. "What if I wish for more than that?" Bethany's heart stuttered. "Drew, I love you, Bethany Hughes," he said simply. "I think I have since that first night when you read to me by moonlight. I know it's fast. I know you probably think I'm too young or too inexperienced to know my own mind, but I do know it. I love you and I want you to stay here with me not as our housekeeper, but as—" He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "As what?" Bethany prompted softly. Drew took a deep breath. "As my wife. Eventually. When we're both ready." Bethany sat perfectly still, shock and joy warring within her. She'd known her feelings for Drew had grown far beyond friendship. But marriage? Seemed both terrifying and wonderfully right. "Drew," she paused, gathering her thoughts. "I care for you deeply. These weeks have been transformative. But marriage is a serious step, and we've known each other such a short time. I'm not asking for an answer today," Drew assured her. "Just think about it, about a future here, with me." Bethany nodded, her voice soft. "I will." Drew smiled, relief evident in his expression. "That's all I ask for now." He leaned back in the swing, still holding her hand. "Will you read to me? Out here in the sunshine?" "Of course." As October arrived, bringing cooler weather and autumn colors to the prairie, Drew continued to improve. He was able to move around the house freely, though Adam still forbade him from ranch work or riding. Victoria Blackburn, upon hearing of Drew's accident, arrived at the ranch bearing a basket of preserves and a solicitous smile. Finding Bethany firmly established as part of the household and clearly close to Drew, her expression had soured. "It's so fortunate you had Miss Hughes here during your convalescence," she remarked to Drew as they sat in the parlor. "Though surely now that you're recovering, she must be anxious to continue her journey, perhaps resume her teaching career." Drew's hand found Bethany's, interlacing their fingers openly. Actually, we're hoping Miss Hughes will make her stay permanent. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Permanent? As a housekeeper, you mean? As family, Adam interjected from his armchair. The visit had been brief after that, Victoria making excuses about other errands in town. As they watched her carriage pull away, Adam chuckled. Think we've seen the last of her social calls for a while. October brought more than just Victoria's disappointment. A letter arrived for Bethany from the school board in Broken Arrow, offering her a teaching position for the spring term. It's a good opportunity, Adam said when she showed him the letter. Proper school, decent salary. Only 5 miles from here. Bethany nodded, conflicted. I've missed teaching. No reason you can't do both, Adam suggested. Teach during the day, come home to the ranch in the evenings. Her heart lifted at his casual inclusion of her in the ranch's future. You wouldn't mind? Mind? Adam smiled. Bethany, in the months you've been here, this place has become a home again. Drew's happier than I've seen him in years. And I. He paused, uncharacteristically emotional. Well, I've come to think of you as the daughter I never had. Tears pricked Bethany's eyes. Thank you, Adam. That means more than I can say. Later that evening, she found Drew in the library, browsing through his mother's books. She showed him the letter from the school board. Will you take it? He asked, his expression carefully neutral. I'm considering it, she replied. Your father suggested I could teach during the day and return here in the evenings. Hope bloomed in Drew's eyes. You'd want that? To come back here each day? Bethany stepped closer, gathering her courage. Drew, do you remember when you asked me to think about a future here? With you. He nodded, setting the book aside. Every day. I've thought about it. A great deal. She took a deep breath. I love you, Drew Keller. I love your father, and this ranch, and the life we could build here together. Joy spread across Drew's face. Are you saying yes? To someday? I'm saying yes to now, Bethany replied. To us. To seeing where this leads, without fear or reservation. Drew closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands. I love you, Bethany Hughes. His lips met hers in a tender, reverent kiss that held all the promise of their future. In the doorway, Adam smiled to himself before quietly retreating, leaving them to their private moment. Spring arrived on the prairie with a burst of wildflowers and green grass. Bethany divided her time between teaching at the Broken Arrow School and life at the ranch, which had become her true home. Each morning, Drew would drive her to school in the wagon, and each afternoon, he would be waiting to bring her home. On a particularly beautiful April day, as they drove back to the ranch, Drew turned off the main road onto a smaller trail that wound through a grove of cottonwoods. Where are we going? Bethany asked, curious about the detour. Got something to show you, Drew replied mysteriously. The trail opened into a small clearing beside a creek. A blanket had been spread on the ground, with a basket set upon it. A picnic. Bethany smiled, pleasantly surprised. Among other things, Drew helped her down from the wagon, his touch lingering. They sat together on the blanket, sharing the simple meal Drew had prepared: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and early strawberries from their garden. As they ate, Drew seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. Is everything all right? Bethany asked, reaching for his hand. Drew took a deep breath. Remember that night you first read to me? When I asked you to stay for one more story? Of course. I knew then. Even then, I knew I wanted you to stay forever. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. I love you, Bethany Hughes, more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. It was my mother's, he explained softly. Pa gave it to me last week. said it was time. Tears filled Bethany's eyes as she looked from the ring to Drew's hopeful face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Drew Keller. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that spoke of all their tomorrows. They were married that June in the small church in Tulsa, with Adam standing proudly beside his son and the entire town in attendance. Even Victoria Blackburn came, her disappointment tempered by the news that her daughter Margaret had become engaged to a banker from Oklahoma City. After the ceremony, they celebrated at the ranch, the house and yard filled with laughter and music for the first time in years. When evening fell, lanterns were lit, casting a magical glow over the gathering. Happy? Drew asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Bethany looked up at him, her heart full. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Adam joined them, his face more relaxed and content than Bethany had ever seen it. Catherine would have loved you, he told her, his voice gruff with emotion. She'd be pleased to see her boy so well matched. Later that night, as Bethany prepared for bed in what was now their room, Drew, having moved his things into the larger bedroom that had once been a guest chamber, she found a package on her pillow, wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound book, its cover embossed with gold lettering, New Adventures. Drew entered, smiling at her discovery. Thought we might need a new book. For new stories. Bethany opened it to find blank pages. It's empty. For us to fill, Drew explained, with our own story, our adventures together. Bethany set the book aside and went to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. I love it. And I love you, Drew Keller. And I love you, Bethany Keller, he replied, still savoring the sound of her new name. For now and always. 1 year later, Bethany stood on the porch of their home, watching as Drew rode in from checking the north pasture. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, their first child due to arrive in just a few weeks. Adam joined her, his hair now more silver than dark, his face lined but happy. He rides like his mother, he observed. Catherine had that same easy way with horses. You still miss her, Bethany said softly. Every day, Adam agreed. But it's different now. The ache isn't as sharp. He glanced at Bethany's pregnant form. New life has a way of healing old wounds. Drew dismounted, handing the reins to one of the ranch hands before jogging to the porch. Everything all right? He asked, his eyes immediately going to Bethany's belly. Perfect, she assured him. Your son was just practicing his kicking. Or daughter, Drew reminded her with a grin. They had chosen not to predict the baby's gender, preferring the surprise. That evening, after dinner, they sat together in the parlor as had become their custom. Adam in his armchair with the newspaper, Drew and Bethany on the sofa. But tonight, instead of reading from a book, Drew opened the leather journal he had given Bethany on their wedding night. I thought we might start filling this, he said, for the baby, so they'll know our story. Bethany smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Where should we begin? Drew's eyes met hers, filled with love. How about at the beginning? With a schoolteacher who arrived in a dusty town, and a cowboy's son who asked her to stay for one more story. And she never left, Bethany finished softly. Not ever. As Drew began to write their story in his careful hand, Bethany closed her eyes, grateful for the journey that had brought her here to this ranch, to this family, to this love that had transformed her life. Outside, the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Inside, surrounded by love, Bethany Keller knew she had found her true home. 5 years later, Bethany sat on the porch swing, watching as Drew taught their 4-year-old son William how to ride his pony in the corral nearby. Their daughter Elizabeth, just 2, sat on Bethany's lap, pointing excitedly at her brother. "Look, Mama, Will riding." "Yes, sweetheart," Bethany agreed, kissing the top of the little girl's head. "He's getting very good." Adam emerged from the house, moving more slowly these days but still spry for his years. He settled beside Bethany on the swing, smiling as Elizabeth immediately climbed into his lap. "Grandpa, story?" the little girl demanded. "Later, little one," Adam promised. "After supper." "Those two are the spitting image of Drew and Catherine at that age," he remarked. "Got that same Keller stubbornness. A family trait I've come to appreciate," Bethany replied with a smile. "Usually," Adam chuckled. "School board still trying to convince you to take the principal position?" Bethany nodded. The small school in Tulsa had reopened the previous year, and the board had been persistent in their efforts to hire her as principal. "I told them I'm happy teaching my current schedule. 3 days a week is perfect enough to keep my hand in without taking too much time from the children and the ranch." Adam nodded approvingly. "Wise decision." In the corral, William let out a whoop of delight as the pony trotted in a perfect circle under Drew's watchful guidance. Drew looked up, catching Bethany's eye with a grin of shared pride. Later that evening, after the children were bathed and in their pajamas, the family gathered in the parlor for their nightly tradition. Adam settled in his armchair, Elizabeth on his lap, while William sat cross-legged on the floor, eager for the story. "Which one tonight?" Bethany asked, looking at the bookshelf that had expanded considerably over the years. "The cowboy story," William requested. "About Papa and the horse." Bethany smiled, reaching for the leather journal that was now half filled with their family history. "Again? We read that one last night." "Please, Mama," Elizabeth added her plea, her blue eyes so like Drew's wide and hopeful. "How can you refuse those faces?" Drew asked, settling beside her on the sofa. "Besides, it's a good story." Bethany opened the journal to the well-worn page. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a young woman who traveled to a small town in Oklahoma Territory, hoping to begin a new life as a schoolteacher. But the school was closed." William interrupted, already knowing the story by heart. "That's right," Bethany continued. "The school was closed, and she had nowhere to go. But a kind old man in town told her about a ranch where she might find work." "Grandpa's ranch," Elizabeth chimed in. Adam smiled at his granddaughter. "That's right, little one." As she walked toward the ranch, the young woman was very tired and worried, Bethany read. But then she met a handsome young cowboy on a chestnut horse. "Papa!" both children exclaimed. Drew grinned, slipping his arm around Bethany's shoulders. "The most fortunate moment of my life." Bethany continued the story, embellished now with details for the children's enjoyment. Drew's horse described as the fastest in the territory. The ranch house as big as a castle. The adventure of Drew's accident and recovery made less frightening and more heroic. When she reached the part about their wedding day, William yawned widely, his eyelids growing heavy. Elizabeth was already asleep against Adam's chest. "I think that's enough for tonight," Bethany said, closing the book. "The rest of the story can wait until tomorrow." Adam rose carefully, cradling Elizabeth. "I'll take this little one up to bed." Drew scooped up William, who protested sleepily. "But I want to hear the rest." "Tomorrow," Drew promised. "There's always tomorrow for more stories." After the children were tucked in, Bethany and Drew returned to the porch, sitting together in the swing as they had done so many evenings over the years. The stars were bright overhead, the night air crisp with the promise of autumn. Drew took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the wedding band that had joined her engagement ring. 6 years, he marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you arrived in Tulsa, and sometimes it feels like I've always been here," Bethany replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. Like this was always where I was meant to be. It was, Drew said simply. I knew it that first night, when I asked you to stay and read one more story. Bethany smiled, remembering. I never expected to find this a home, a family, such love when I stepped off that stagecoach. Disappointed, Drew teased, knowing the answer. Bethany turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Only that we can't live it all again, from the beginning. Every moment has been a gift. Drew kissed her softly, tenderly. We have the rest of our lives for new moments, new stories. Inside the house, Adam watched them from the window, his heart full. Catherine would be proud, he thought, of the family their son had built, of the love that now filled their home. As he turned away, allowing the young couple their privacy, he silently thanked his wife for the lessons she had taught him about love and second chances, lessons that had allowed him to open his heart and home to the young schoolteacher who had transformed their lives. On the porch, Bethany and Drew remained in each other's arms, the swing moving gently beneath them, their future stretching out before them like the endless prairie sky full of promise, adventure, and above all, love.